Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. I'm Justin Brady, and I know that a huge election just happened. I know everyone's thinking about that. But the reason you're either elated or frustrated today is because you were given a choice to vote. You were given a choice to vote in a free country for the person and the people who will lead that country. That's not actually something many people in this world have the choice to do, and it's all because of our veterans. And of course, Veterans Day is quickly approaching. And today we have Pat Kinney, the oral historian at the Grout Museum District in Waterloo, to discuss just that. Pat, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa Podcast. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Justin.
And for those that don't know, Pat is a saint because he has been helping me diagnose technical issues connecting this morning for like 15 minutes. So, Pat, I appreciate the patience and sticking with me. First of all, let's discuss the oral. You have this, and this is actually the reason I wanted to have you on the show, because you have this really incredible project going on in Waterloo. It's called the Voices of Iowa Project. It's essentially an oral history of veteran stories. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Well, it was started in 2001 by my colleague, Bob Niemeyer, who's the museum historian. He's a state-recognized historian. The thinking was that, you know, you hear veterans tell stories, and as your family member, you might hear them and you go, boy, we got to get this recorded sometime. Well, that's kind of the job we do. We sit down with them. Usually takes about an hour. We ask them about their military service experience. We video record the interview. We have it in our archives here at the museum, and we use them for our exhibits. And we provide the person we interview, the veteran, with a recording of the interview, and that they can share with family and friends. And they end up becoming family keepsakes. Some of these veterans pass away, and they use those recordings at funeral visitations to share with family. We have 2,300 oral history interviews, mostly veterans, some farmers, some local history, and we've started a Black History project too. But it's one of the largest collections of oral histories around. We've even helped. We helped a couple years ago help Senator Grassley's office do some oral history interviews here for the Library of Congress, and it's all eras and branches of service going back to World War II, and some of those folks have passed on, and that's why it's kind of underscores the importance of getting folks' stories recorded while they're still with us. I've had a couple of folks that have passed away within days or weeks of us doing an oral history interview, and we're really grateful that we got them when we did. Had that happen just a couple months ago, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there obviously there's a ton of Veterans Day content I'm going to discuss with you, but does the Voices of Iowa project extend beyond just veterans? Because you mentioned veterans, but then you mentioned like farmers. What's the full scope of the project? We expanded into the farm interviews through grants we got through Silos and Smokestacks, which is a national heritage area emphasizing history of industry and agriculture, kind of the northeast corner of the state. The Farm Bureau has supported us in the past. Bob Niemeyer has handled the bulk of that. He's gone out, interviewed farmers where they are, Century Farms, different aspects of that. We had a prohibition exhibit here at the museum, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago, and drew from a lot of the farm interviews for that, because a lot of these people, they kind of combined the Depression and the Prohibition era, and we had a pretty decent number of bootleggers in Iowa. If anybody knows about the split states history, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the Templeton Rye story everybody thinks of, but apparently that wasn't in isolation.
Well, there was a fellow named Al Capone that used to set up shop at the Julian Dubuque Inn in Dubuque, and he had a hotel in Bloomfield where he'd come and pick up his wholesale liquor from bootleggers around here.
I've heard of
So,
him. I've heard of him.
yeah, yeah,
So you said 2,300 video interviews of Iowa vets, and then you give the DVDs to those families. That's a lot. And you mentioned these were all hour-long video projects. Can you tell me how you find the vets and how you capture this? You go to them, you bring a camera crew? Is this basically what goes on? It sounds like a ton of work.
yeah. Well, some folks want to come here because the Grout Museum District, we have the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Veterans Museum, which is a museum for all Iowa veterans. It's named for the five brothers from Waterloo who died together during World War II, but it's for all Iowa veterans. So some folks come and they want to see the museum along with doing the interview. So that's, it's a kind of a treat for them to come. But we will go to people where they are. Bob and I went down to Camp Dodge and we interviewed now retired Adjutant General, the National Guard, Ben Corral, and a lot of Guard soldiers there who had been multiple deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sinai Peninsula. Gone out to Sac City. I'd been out there on a freelance journalism project, made some contacts with folks out there, and I doubled back and did some interviews, worked through the County Veteran Affairs Director there. We worked with the folks at the Veterans Memorial Building down in Cedar Rapids, lined up several interviews down there. I'm working on some in the Quad Cities right now. Yeah, we'll go to people where they are because this is a statewide museum, and everybody, any veteran, any Iowa veteran is eligible to be interviewed.
Is the goal then just to collect as many Iowa stories from veterans as possible, and you'll basically, the Grout Museum District will send you or whoever else to do that?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. We are a repository for these stories, and we share those stories with the vets, so we give them recordings so they can share it with their family too. And we use excerpts from these in our exhibits. Like if it's an anniversary of a certain event like D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge, we have 3 or 4 interviews of veterans. We can pull those out, take excerpts from them. We also have an online platform. We do Voices of Iowa oral history snippets, little 5-minute excerpts from the interviews. Bob and I went down 5 years ago down to Van Meter and interviewed Bill Knapp, founder of Iowa Realty. He piloted a landing craft at Okinawa, and he had a lot of stories to tell. So
really,
we put a clip of him online too, and we've had other ones like that too. It's kind of like it interests people. It kind of gives them a flavor for how we do it, what folks do. And the other thing is, a lot of veterans will say, it's like, well, I didn't do too much. I didn't kill anybody. I wasn't in combat. That doesn't matter. Everybody had a job to do. Everybody had something of service that they did. Had a fella come in one time and he said, well, I didn't too much. I was sitting in a submarine listening to radio signals off of Russia. And we're going, dude, nobody, how many people get to do that?
Yeah.
Tell us more, So
that's, and that's like, obviously code breaking and listening to signals was a huge part of the war. That's an enormous part of the war. It is funny, like the armed services, there are a bunch of roles to win a war and to protect freedoms. And all those roles individually don't seem that significant, but when they're collected, they seem way more significant. The process of like recording all of this, I mean, as someone who records things for a living, it sounds very daunting. How do you index all this? Like you mentioned that when an event will happen, you'll push up that video. But for anybody who has like recorded videos before, like how do you organize all of it and find it and make sure that you're pulling the right videos for the right event? And how can people access all that information? Like it seems like a really tough task in and of itself.
We have all of the interviews here at the museum library, and they're available to the public to come see. We have a top-notch IT director, Jonathan Ettringer, and he compiles these, and we have them in a queue, and we can access them. And a lot of it is we remember some of the folks we interview because their stories are pretty outstanding. Between Bob and I mean, I've been here about 6 years, and I worked for the worked for Waterloo Courier for 30-some years. So between the two of us, we've interviewed an awful lot of veterans.
Sure.
A lot of stories stand out, and we remember them. And but we also have them, categorized and filed. And we had some help from some folks at the University of Northern Iowa Library too, that they pulled together a big Iowa Veterans Remembrance Project, where we've got a kind of an online directory too of folks of service, and whether there's a video available of them, that kind of thing.
You mentioned
So.
earlier on, and this is a story that I feel like is many Iowans do understand and know the story, but many Iowans have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So I want to go back to it because it's a really powerful story, and it actually changed how the armed services work. But you mentioned the Sullivan Brothers. The Sullivan Brothers. Tell us that story, but also tell us like their relationship with the Grout Museum District.
Sure. George Francis Joseph Madison and Albert Sullivan were the sons of Thomas and Alida Sullivan of Waterloo. They enlisted right at Pearl Harbor. They had a friend who from just north of here in Fredericksburg who was killed on the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. So they all enlisted, and they enlisted on the condition they'd be allowed to serve together. And that was a departure from Navy policy, but they stuck to their guns. And in the words of the oldest brother, George Sullivan, he said, "We stick together." So they waived it, and they allowed them to serve on the same ship, which was the light cruiser USS Juneau. The Juneau was involved in the naval battle of Guadalcanal. It was a nighttime, god-awful naval battle. If you've ever seen the movie In Harm's Way, it's almost kind of like that. The Juneau and other damaged ships were coming back to port afterwards, and the Juneau was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, and it exploded. And there were, of the crew of nearly 700, there were only 14 survivors, and all the Sullivans were lost.
Wow.
One of them survived the sinking, but died at sea on raft later on. So that was a terrific loss for the community. It got a lot of, their enlistment and their deaths both got a lot of nationwide attention. President Roosevelt commissioned a destroyer to be named for them. He changed the name of the ship, called it USS the Sullivans. It's the first ship in the Navy that was named for more than one person. It served in World War II in Korea, and it was, ironically, it was, and it was known to have a shamrock on a smokestack for the brothers' Irish heritage, but it participated in a large number of sea and air rescues of downed sailors and airmen, and just kind of ironic given the way the brothers died. That ship was decommissioned, and it's in Buffalo, New York now at a military park. There's a second ship, the USS the Sullivan's DDG-68. It's a guided missile destroyer. Was commissioned in 1997, and that's based in Mayport, Florida. It's still on active duty. It's had multiple deployments. It's been, it was just not too long ago in the Red Sea on deployment, given the current situation in Gaza with the Hamas-Israel war. It's been on deployment with the British Royal Navy, did a world cruise. They've had multiple deployments. It's, they really work. And the connection with the museum, one of the founders of the museum here, Ed Gallagher, was an attorney in town, and he was a Navy World War II vet, and he thought there should be some larger recognition for the Sullivans. There was a park, we got the convention center. The convention center was renamed for them, and now we have a plaza there by the convention center for them. But this museum, it was an addition onto the Grout Museum, was built and opened in 2008, and we have permanent exhibits of every era of wars and conflict in which Iowans served, and and the family is still connected. Kelly Sullivan is the granddaughter of Albert Sullivan, the youngest of the brothers and the only one who married. And she is the official sponsor of the currently serving USS Sullivans, as her great-grandmother was of the first ship. She's probably one of the most active sponsors in the Navy, and just a wonderful ambassador for community and for the Navy and for Iowa. we've had ship reunions here at the museum of the sailors that had served on both USS the Sullivans. But she's an intrinsic part of this museum, and her father, Jim, who was the only child of the five brothers, he's still alive too. He's retired, living in Waterloo.
So the Grout Museum district is a lot of Iowa history and, of course, Waterloo history, but the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Veterans Museum is a part of the Grout Museum district, but this one is focused on veterans, obviously. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And statewide. Yeah.
Now, it's statewide. Tell me, now, I see what you mean. It's focused statewide.
Yeah, we honor. We say we're honoring all Iowans who served. One of the features we have of the museum, we've got a little reflective area, kind of like a little chapel area, and there's a rolling scroll of every Iowan that ever died in service to our country, going all the way back. And just a rolling scroll, people can come and see. And if they have a family member, they can stop it and see if they can find a family member there too. There's other aspects too. We've got a information kiosk where we've got photos and biographies of every Iowan that was killed in Vietnam. A Vietnam veteran helped compile that for us. And it's, you can do a electronic rubbing like you could as if you visited the wall. You get a paper print out of a rubbing, and it means a lot to a lot of folks because that's pretty immediate conflict, because a lot of people had, parents and grandparents and brothers friends who served in it. So
it's easy, we're kind of in an era where I feel like for some reason it's easy to forget all the past sacrifices people have made, which is why it's good to have Veterans Day so we can go back over this and we can remind people that a lot of people had to put themselves in harm's way so that you all can enjoy the life you have here in Iowa. Are there any, obviously you've recorded, I don't know if you've done them all yourself, but 2,300 total interviews so far, which is very significant. Are there any that to you really stick out, like any that you really remember distinctly?
This wasn't an interview, but it was a nice project. One of the things I was researching is we're trying to compile Iowans who were killed in Korea. And I ran across a gentleman here from Waterloo here, who enlisted in the Korean War at a very young age, and he was killed very early in the war. And it looked like he didn't make it out of high school. And I contacted the athletic director at East High School here in Waterloo and said, I found this fella, and I found some newspaper clippings, and I said, it doesn't look like he even graduated. I said, I know some folks that some school districts give honorary diplomas to soldiers whose service was interrupted or they died in service. And it ended up we found some family members and presented the family with an honorary diploma in behalf of that gentleman. And it turned out he enlisted when he was, like, I don't know if folks signed for him. He lied about his age, but he was only about 15 or 16 when he enlisted, because he was 18 when he died. The document, because on his headstone records were, it showed that. So, and he was in one of the first units sent to Korea, and it was at that point they hadn't completely desegregated, so it was a all black unit, but they were one of the first ones that were engaged in combat in Korea, and he got overran early on in the war and he was killed. But we wanted to honor the family, and it turned out there were several family members. In fact, his stepbrother was the first black police detective in the Waterloo Police Department. So it was really satisfying to make that connection. So and to honor the soldier.
That's incredible. Are there any other stories that come to mind? I have a lot of questions for you, but I can't help myself but to try to tap the memory part of your brain for all these stories you've collected.
Well, and this one wasn't for the paper, wasn't for the museum, but I did this when I was a reporter for the paper. There was a Korean veteran that I interviewed over in Evansdale, which is a town about 5,000 east side of Waterloo here, and that fellow was bedridden, and he had multiple Bronze Stars and Purple Hearts, and he was involved in Korea early on. He was captured for a while and escaped capture from the North Koreans. He get out in a rice paddy, just a lot of stuff like that. And he was just really bedridden, but I got the interview. I mean, I get really close. I had to get really close to hear him and everything. I got after that. After I left the house, I just kind of pulled over and kind of had to collect my emotions a little bit. And he passed away a few months after that. But I was glad we got that interview and got his story, and I think his family was too. So,
Yeah, that's incredible. The Waterloo, you have this designation, a World War II heritage designation. Can you explain what that is?
the National Park Service started a program about a year and a half ago to where one city from every state was designated as the official American World War II heritage city for that state. Um, Tim Hurley was a former mayor here, heard about that, wanted to get after it. So current mayor Quentin Hart put former Mayor Hurley in charge of a committee to kind of put that together. We assembled an application between Bob Niemeyer and myself. We did a lot of research for it, along with Brian Schoen, who's the head of our metro planning organization. And last December, between the holidays, the National Park Service designated Waterloo as Iowa's official World War II American Heritage City. The Sullivans were a big part of it. Also, it was because of the massive amount of war production we had here, being an industrial community. The John Deere Tractor Works converted to producing transmissions for Sherman tanks. We had other industries producing packs. Raft Packing Company supplied meat for the troops. Just a lot of industrial production. My mom worked in a defense plant here during the war. She reamed mortar shells at Associated Manufacturing in Waterloo. I mean, it was a
Wow.
pretty sizable mobilization and kind of a microcosm of what happened in the rest of the country. Plus, our National Guard battalion here, who has served multiple deployments since 9/11, our National Guard battalion here, 1st Battalion, 133rd Infantry Regiment, is called the Iron Man Battalion because it served 611 consecutive days in combat in World War II, fighting up through Italy. It was in this bloody, awful siege of Monte Cassino, which,
Wow.
if anybody knows history of World War II, that was an awful mess and a long, long struggle. And they were in that. That's where they got the name Iron Man Battalion. So there's a lot of different, tangents to go on, but that assembled as a whole package got the Park Service to designate us as Iowa's World War II heritage city.
Now, you said there's only one per state?
Yes, one per state. There's been 38 designated so far.
Oh, yeah, because this is a recent thing. You were designated, I think you said this, maybe not, December of 2023. And so there's only 38 designations so far nationally.
Yeah. And, it's timely that we got this because next year is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II.
Oh, right.
So we're kind of just trying to get our arms around how we can use this to commemorate, that's those folks' sacrifice. We have another project going on at the museum here where we were donated years ago and we just discovered it. We have the flag from our National Guard battalion here, which according to our artifacts registrar's research, it is the first flag any American military unit carried into Europe in World War II. Because
really?
our National Guard battalion, set foot, and they landed in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and we found a Life magazine article and newsreels where they were carrying the flag down the streets of Belfast, and we're trying to restore that flag now, and we've applied to a grant from the National Daughters of American Revolution. Did a lot of local fundraising here for local veterans posts and individuals, because we had to get a local match for it. So it's kind of a perfect storm of events if we can get that flag restoration project underway in conjunction with what's going on with American Heritage City. I mean, it's great timing.
How much does a flag restoration cost, out of curiosity? And what is I'm really curious about that and what's involved.
It depends on the age. We got a quote from a company in Minneapolis on this particular flag, and the quote was just under $10,000.
Oh, okay.
We've raised more than $5,000 now for the local match for the DAR grant application. Older project. Older flags take a lot more. You might remember the state of Iowa did a massive Civil War battle flag restoration project, and I think a lot of those flags are still at the Iowa State Capitol. We did one here with a Civil War regimental flag from a local unit in Cedar Falls. It's on display here at the museum, but it has to be, and that cost a lot more because it was so much older. It's 80 years before World War II even, but it has to be displayed flat because if it's so old it'd be granulated. If you tipped it up on its side, it would just kind of collapse. So we have to have it, just kind of laid out flat, and it's encased and and not in direct light. But this flag was in, obviously it's more recent, so it's in a little bit better shape. It's got some wear, and we just want to get it encased, preserved, put it on permanent display here at the museum with an explanation as to what it was. And the guard soldiers in town are really enthusiastic about it too. We have the guard veterans too that served in the same battalion are really interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, like I said earlier, the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Veterans Museum, which everybody for Veterans Day, you should definitely check out there in Waterloo. But it's a part of the Grout Museum and what you call the Grout Museum District. Obviously, I appreciate you coming on here today, and I want to give you the opportunity to discuss what the Grout Museum District even is, so that people know what that's all about.
The estate of Henry Grout, who was an entrepreneur and developer in town here, his estate established what was originally the Grout Museum of History and Science. The items were on display in the 30s, but an actual museum building opened in 1956. There's been renovations and additions. One of the biggest ones being the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Veterans Museum, which opened in 2008. We have kind of a campus. We also have there's a city park between us and the other buildings on our campus. We have the Blue Dorn Science Imaginarium, which is about 30 years old. I think it opened in 1993. And that's just a lot of science and hands-on stuff for kids. Kind of like the science station in Cedar Rapids. We inherited some of their exhibits when they closed after the flood in 2008 too. And we have two historic houses on campus, the Rensselaer-Russell House and the Snowden House. They are, 19th century Italianate architecture and on the National Register of Historic Places. And we use those once in a while for special events, but we have all kinds of education programs here. We have a 25-year-old museum school program where we bring third graders from school districts all over our local area here to the museum for a week, where they can just tour all the buildings and see everything we have to offer. We've been doing it so long that some of the first museum school students are now actually teachers themselves and bringing their kids.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And Kelly Sullivan is a third grade teacher in Cedar Falls, and she brings her kids every year.
Oh, interesting.
And one of the other things we do is every Wednesday morning from 10 to noon, we have a free veterans coffee. Today's the day. It's a Wednesday. It's going to start when we're recording this, and it's going to start in about 10 minutes. Kelly brings her students in. She brings them to the vets coffee and, has the kids make up thank you cards and stuff like that to give to the vets, and they just get a big thrill out of it. We get about 2 or 3 dozen vets every week.
It's absolutely amazing. And my grandpa served in World War II. And, it's one of those things that at the time he told his war stories and he told, things he was involved in. He spared us with the more ugly stuff. After he passed, that's when my sister actually compiled a book about his notes and things he did and where he served. And he, we didn't realize just how active he was and how close, how many close calls he was a part of. Yeah, obviously you don't tell children those stories, but, and it's just amazing to me that I'm like, at the time I didn't understand. I was a little kid. I wasn't, I don't remember how old I was, but you don't really appreciate these stories as much. I mean, obviously I loved Grandpa and his stories were really cool, but now I'm like, wow, now I'm a professional interviewer and I have so many more questions. I have thousands of questions for him that I can't ask. And so it's really incredible to me that you are all capturing all these veteran stories on video. Like, that is just amazing. And you're building this huge, huge project, over 2,300 video interviews of vets. So if people want access to that and they want to see videos, they want to look up some of these stories, are they digital? Like, they come there and then you can pull it and they can watch it there? Is that how they access it? Are there computers that they just can search through by date? How does that process work?
Yeah, there's computers down in the library. They can look them up. They're stored digitally. And
okay, got it.
If they want to sample, get samples of some of our interviews, they're on our webpage too, which is groutmuseumdistrict.org.
Groutmuseumdistrict.org. Okay, got it. Groutmuseumdistrict.org.
Yeah, and there's a Voices of Iowa option on the main webpage. You click on that, and you can pull up some of the interviews.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes as well. Pat Kinney, oral historian at the Grout Museum District in Waterloo. Thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast for this special Veterans Day episode. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And, if anybody's listening to this, if you know or love a veteran, get them to us and tell their story while they're still with us. It's important because the kids need to know about it, and their service needs to be commemorated, no matter what they did.
I'm glad you said that because, we have a lot of veteran families that listen to this show. And so, like Pat, I'll echo what you said, Pat. If you have a veteran in your family and their story's untold, please get in touch with Pat and his team to get that video recorded. You may not understand the significance, but people in your family absolutely do, and they will want to hear this story later. Pat, can you give the website out one more time, please?
It's groutmuseumdistrict.org. G as in go, R-O-U-T, Museum District, all one word, no dots between, groutmuseumdistrict.org.
Pat Kinney, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin. Great. Thank you.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa podcast.